This video isn't going to give you much insight into the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. It's not meant to. At the end of my video, I'll direct you guys to a content creator named LonerBox, who is a political commentator. He does a lot of coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and I think he does it extremely well. This video is going to be a bit more focused on the recent Hamas invasion, and more importantly, the reaction that occurred on social media to the horrific violence that took place that day. I want to talk to you guys today about the fine line that separates revolutionary action and terrorism. Before I dive into the meat of this video, I want to state off rip that support for Palestine should never equal the implicit endorsement of a terrorist organization.
And as you might have seen, there was some sort of rave or desert party where they were having a great time until the resistance came in electrified hang gliders and took at least several dozen hipsters. But I'm sure they're doing very fine despite what the New York Post says.
Long live Palestine. Thank you all for being here, for raising your voices to celebrate the glorious victory of the resistance.
Rightful anger at how Palestinians have been mistreated by the Israeli government should never be equated to the justification or the death of innocent civilians on either side.
Did the Palestinians actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news? I don't care.
Yeah, the occupiers are not civilians.
The actions of extremists should not be the death penalty of civilians who just want human rights. And any advocacy for either Israeli citizens or the Palestinian people to be eradicated is unjustifiable.
What do you think the response should be from Netanyahu and the military to Gaza?
All Palestinians, all of them. Not one left from the river to the sea. Palestine will be deceased. Nothing else you can do. They proved to us that there's nothing else you can do. We tried, and
we tried everything. It doesn't work. We have to wipe them flat off the fucking map.
Flatten it. Flatten Gaza.
I want everyone to remember the faces of those who claim to advocate for human rights, but once confronted with an actual event like this, leave their humanity at the door. Any person who celebrates in light of such a tragedy should have to face the same fate as the graves that they danced on, but even that would be too good for them. So, with that aside, what is the difference? Who is considered a revolutionary and who is considered a terrorist? The answer to this question is a little dependent on who you ask, but that really isn't satisfying to me. It can't be the case that who is or isn't a revolutionary or a terrorist comes down to which side you happen to be on. It is understandable that a group that knows nothing but violence would resort to it, but as an outsider, we have a better position to be a bit more objective, and we ought to be a bit more objective. A revolutionary and a terrorist do have similarities in the sense they are enacting some sort of violence in order to foster some political gain. Now, whether you agree or not with the stated end goal of that violence isn't really an objective way to determine your position one way or the other. Rather, a better way is to focus on who the target is of that violence. Identifying the stated target of a group's violence is the key determining factor on how certain groups should be viewed in a historical context and as history is being made. To illustrate my point, and so there isn't really much confusion as what I'm talking about, here's an example. Here in America, killing another person is illegal. We call that action murder. But if you kill someone who is attempting to kill you or cause you some sort of harm, we call that self-defense. Both are the action of killing somebody, but the added context alters the way we feel about the action. The difference is whether we as a society have decided that one over the other is more justified. The same concept maps onto the difference between terrorism and revolutionary action. Terrorism has no regard for human life, as long as their ultimate goal is met. They do not care who they kill, who they get killed, or what the consequences of their actions are. So civilians are fair play, civilians can be targets. Revolutionary action, or resistance fighting, or liberation, or whatever you want to call it, takes into account the consequences of their actions as far as understanding how it will affect the eventual outcome they want. Revolutionary action is political in nature, and that means public perception should be held in high regard to garner public support, which means who and what you target absolutely matters. And this has time and time again been borne out in history to be the best way to foster positive outcomes for the people of any nation. Nelson Mandela, a true revolutionary. Some people compare the Israel-Palestine conflict to South African apartheid, but I want to read the words of Nelson Mandela, former president of South Africa and leader of the anti-apartheid movement, as he gave his statement at his trial for treason. Some of the things so far told to the court are true and some are untrue. I do not, however, deny that I planned sabotage. I did not plan it in a spirit of recklessness, nor because I have any love of violence. I planned it as a result of a calm and sober assessment of the political situation that had arisen after many years of tyranny, exploitation, and oppression of my people by the whites. 4 forms of violence were possible. There is sabotage, There is guerrilla warfare, there is terrorism, and there is open revolution. We chose to adopt the first method. Sabotage did not involve loss of life, and it offered the best hope for future race relations. Bitterness would be kept to a minimum, and if the policy bore fruit, democratic government could become a reality. The initial plan was based on a careful analysis of the political and economic situation of our country. We believed that South Africa depended to a large extent on foreign capital and foreign trade. We felt that planned destruction of power plants and interference with rail and telephone communications would scare away capital from the country, thus compelling the voters of the country to reconsider their position. The whites and blacks were moving into separate camps, and the prospects of avoiding a civil war were made less. The white newspapers carried reports that sabotage would be punished by death. If this was so, how could we continue to keep Africans away from terrorism? Nelson Mandela is a revolutionary, not because of what political side you find yourself agreeing with, but because of the fundamental care for every step of the process of attaining peace and prosperity for his people. Notice who Mandela and the African National Congress targeted. They didn't target civilians, they targeted the supplies of foreign capital and foreign trade, with the explicit goal that sabotage would bear the best outcome for black South Africans. This is a stark contrast of the false revolution that people supporting Palestine have rallied behind. I find it questionable that the actions of Hamas could even remotely be considered revolutionary in nature, and it's insulting to include their heinous acts with the likes of real revolutionaries such as Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King, who prioritized non-violence with the eventual goal of peace. What Hamas did was uninhibited violence, with no regard for the life of Israeli civilians and no regard for the consequences this would potentially have on Palestinian people. Can violence be permissible? One question I ask myself regularly is, what could change my mind or alter my perspective of events? A few questions came up. What is wrong with what happened? Which I'm trying to answer with this video. What are my general thoughts of the Israel-Palestine conflict, to which I answered in the beginning of the video? Is it possible that more historical context could change my disgust to the events that took place? I'm starting to realize that history matters to the extent of understanding how we got to where we are today, but history can't be used to justify the actions of today. The people of the past aren't the people of today. This isn't a way we have ever applied history because it doesn't make sense to do so. It doesn't make sense to hold people today responsible for the actions of their ancestors. It would be similar to giving Native Americans full justification to murder every American citizen because America is their historical land and Americans are occupiers or settlers. So no, I don't think that any amount of past actions could justify the merciless killing of civilians today. But the final question that came to me was, what would have to change to make the attack permissible from my perspective? I believe violence is permissible if it's in response to violence. But that means your violence has to be directed at the doers of that violence that is done against you. In this case, you can argue that action against the state is permissible. And I largely agree with that sentiment. Palestinian people are unarguably getting fucked in every conceivable way. Their struggle is largely comparable to the struggle Native Americans went through as settlers entered their home. Natives were killed, tortured, raped, forced onto reservations, and given rotten food. They had every right to resist and fight for their livelihood. But that right isn't carte blanche to kill civilians indiscriminately. If Hamas had directed its action toward the IDF or to doing things that would actively help the Palestinian people, I would have no reaction to it. But what happened during the Hamas invasion was not a permissible violent response. Over 1,000 Israeli people were killed. But I think people aren't recognizing the recourse from Israel is largely aimed at Hamas, but will absolutely massively harm the Palestinian people. Palestinian people gained absolutely nothing from Hamas's actions. The Palestinian people do not deserve what is to come. Hamas does. And it is so disheartening that we can't even begin to talk about the real issue that they are about to face because of the reaction of some of the left's premier political commentators. The blind conflation of terroristic action with liberation. This is not what liberation looks like. This is what a careless death cult looks like. And anybody who defends that should be peered out with the utmost disgust and should feel shame for the rest of their lives for the lack of humanity they employed in the face of such a tragedy. I think I have thus far expressed my grievances in full. I've done as much as I can to illustrate the fundamental issue I have, the philosophical issue I have towards this type of violent action. If you still support Hamas after all of this, you are truly lost. I will reiterate again that advocacy for Palestinian human rights does not mean you have to endorse a terrorist organization and its actions. It is not a contradictory position to show full support for Palestinian human rights and simultaneously condemn Hamas. During the BLM protests, Back in 2020, lefties got infuriated when people would say all lives matter in response to protesters saying Black Lives Matter. It was seen as an implicit counterstatement and a dog whistle endorsing white supremacy. Well, the roles have reversed and here we are today. You cannot say free Palestine in the direct aftermath of a terror attack against Israeli people. It is an implicit counterstatement and dog whistle indicating your endorsement of terrorism. And like I said at the beginning of the video, if you want more historical context and facts about the Israel-Palestine conflict, LonerBox and on his second channel, LonerBox Live, will be in the description, is a really good resource for understanding the Israel-Palestinian conflict. And he's not one of these schizo fucking dipshits that think defending terrorism is okay. I highly suggest watching a ton of his content on this matter because I think he is one of the more active voices that advocates for Palestinian human rights, but also has empathy for the Israeli civilians that were killed. I was going to spend a lot of time pulling up examples of some of the most disgusting responses to the Hamas invasion as it happened. Second thought, stating that there are no innocent Israelis.
Did the Palestinians actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news? I don't care.
Yeah, the occupiers are not civilians.
Frogan, a hasanabi mod, implicitly endorsing terrorist action. Mia Khalifa, who was abjectly horrible with the response like, can someone please tell the freedom fighters in Palestine to flip their phones and film horizontal? In response to the footage posted by Hamas as they drove with the mangled bodies of kidnapped civilians. But at this point, it's just beating a dead horse. I've already explained the difference between terrorism and liberation. I will never be able to dig a hole deeper than these people have dug for themselves. The final point that I hope I can leave with you guys today is something that I realized as I watched The Leftovers podcast with Ethan and Hassan as they talked about the Hamas invasion. During the extent of this conversation between Ethan and Hassan, there was a big problem that I noticed, and I think this is the heart of the contention. Ethan time and time again would bring up a grievance about seeing innocent Israelis killed by Hamas. And every time that would happen, Hassan would agree, but it always came with a condition. Ethan brought up a bunch of tweets and videos of people like Ben Shapiro and Lindsey Graham advocating for Palestine to be eradicated. This is what both of them had to say in response to those videos and statements.
Here's Ben Shapiro. I mean, no surprise here, obviously, but still.
Oh, he's been baying for blood nonstop.
I mean, here's a video. The UN Special Reporter for Human Rights in Palestine. We are horrified by what's happening, and we are calling for a truce. And here's a video of, Gaza being bombed by missiles. And then Ben, in his infinite empathy and human nature, told them that they can fuck right off. And, this is such... all these people, but looking at Ben, I mean, it's such a lack of human empathy. It's like, it's just fucking evil, man.
These people betray principles of Judaism and centuries of Jewish history of always siding with those who have been oppressed, always being at the forefront of social justice and fighting for emancipation for all people. It's really, really, really disgusting to see that.
Now, I want you guys to pay attention. After Ethan brings up all of the anti-Palestinian examples, like Lindsey Graham saying level the place, or Ben Shapiro advocating for more hawkish Israeli policy. But after that, Ethan brings up some anti-Israeli statements, and I want you to notice how hard it is for Hassan to condemn a single thing without providing some kind of caveat, condition, or defense.
At this time, I want to turn my attention to some of the very evil takes I've heard some prominent folks making about Israelis. And this guy is very popular. He has 1.6 million subscribers. He is a political YouTuber.
I can't see anything.
Called Second Thought. Sorry, this.
Oh yeah, he's my friend. I like JT.
All right, well then you tell me what you think about this.
Did the Palestinians actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news? I don't care.
Yeah, the occupiers are not civilian.
First of all, just straight off the bat,
the person that's talking is Hakim. He is...
Nobody cares. Hassan takes a few minutes of airspace to give a background on his friends, to try and give Ethan context of why they might be pro-terrorism. And if you think I'm being uncharitable, go watch the 3-hour podcast. Hassan does this the entire time.
So according to Second Thought, he says that every Israeli is an occupier and there are no citizens there in response to decapitating babies, which I can now say.
There are two different schools of thought here. So
Hassan wholesale defends Second Thought by telling Ethan what Second Thought believes instead of saying what he believes, which is basically reiterating what was said in the video. Hassan doesn't dispute Second Thought's sentiment, which is why Ethan reiterates again and asks if Hassan thinks what Second Thought said was wrong.
I think it's an extremely evil thing to say.
Let me ask you this.
No. What do you think? What he said is evil?
I think it is, one, unproductive, and two, it does not meet the realities on the ground, and it's not a viable solution.
Here, Hassan again doesn't answer and instead states that the comment from Second Thought doesn't matter because it's just unproductive. Hassan will continue to try and use this line of defense in an attempt to claim that the rhetoric from Second Thought has no impact on the real world.
Calling, just to be clear, calling babies.
No, of course not.
Settlers.
Of course.
And they're not even living.
They're not.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
They're babies.
Hassan switches gears and tries to use international law in order to justify Second Thought's statements and justify Hamas's actions. Just notice the 3 or 4 different types of defenses Hassan has pulled out in order to try and deflect away from answering the question or taking a strong stance. He doesn't take a strong stance at all.
Technically, the reason why the IDF has to exist in the West Bank and behave in the oppressive manner that they behave is because Palestinians, and this is going to sound very radical and possibly very violent, but this is a matter of law, and maybe even if you agree with this, a matter of morality. Palestinians have the legal ground to violently seize back their own homes from the settlers.
If it was settlers, that would be a lot more understandable. Yeah. But let's not obfuscate. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but this dude just called babies militants.
No, I understand. And there are baby settlers as well. But there are baby settlers as well. There are babies in the settlements.
But I don't even know what this is supposed to mean. Hassan clarifies that there are baby settlers. Does that justify them getting killed if they were the babies of settlers? Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but what's the point of distinguishing baby settlers from regular babies if not to justify killing babies?
So as the bodies are fucking still bleeding out, and he's saying this is what liberation struggle looks like: beheading babies, burning families alive, solidarity and victory to the Palestinian people. This is pro-Hamas.
Hassan again avoids the statement by not saying what Second Thought said was wrong. Again, he doesn't take a strong stance. Instead, he tries again to claim that what Second Thought is saying is unproductive and ultimately doesn't have a real world impact.
I've already mentioned that I don't find this to be particularly helpful or productive as far as this conversation goes, not because I am tasked with defending the positions of other people or even criticize them. It's more so that we know what is currently happening. We are now 3-4 days removed from October 7.
Again,
that's what I'm saying.
Timing matters.
A YouTuber with
hold on, this guy's influential.
No, I know, Ethan, but
notice the trick he's trying to play. A YouTuber is meant to downplay and disregard Second Thought's impact, Second Thought's influence. Second Thought has close to 2 million subscribers, and the lowest count videos on his channel are 200,000 and up. He's influential. About every other week, he's speaking to 200,000 people, if not more. It is also so laughable to me that Hassan would say this on the back end of the entire left's criticism of Andrew Tate, Sneeko, Fresh and Fit, all of these people who he claims have a negative impact on the next generation of men. How can people who oppose you have all of this influence and impact on the real world, yet when it comes to you and the side you align with, somehow you don't have absolutely any impact? No influence? You have no power? Because what? That you're not part of these media conglomerates?
His influence is nothing in comparison to the multi-billion-dollar media operation.
I just want to call this guy out. That's what I want to do.
You can call him out.
I just spent
and you can ask
2.5 hours calling out Israel. So now this guy, Second Thought, he's supporting Hamas. He is pro-Hamas. That's what solid. Hold on.
Okay.
Solidarity and victory to the Palestinian people. Oops. Again, the timing that I keep mentioning, as bodies are being counted, is pro-Hamas.
There is absolutely no other way to interpret these statements. Hassan spends the entire rest of the podcast finding every chance to disregard Ethan's grievances with the vitriol expressed against Israeli civilians. The only time Hassan condemns anything is when the people in the video are literally chanting.
This is out of everything that you've shown me, this is demonstrably the worst.
I simply, as a matter of doing this show, want to call out the people that disgusted me. Because again, I hear this all the time. People go, oh, really? Well, show me an example.
I know, but
well, here's one.
No, of course there are examples of this. It's just entirely and utterly inconsequential, and I 100% stand by that.
It's not. He's an influential man. When you're expressing these kinds of...
How can the most popular politics streamer representing the left, who broadcasts to 30,000 or more people on a daily basis, claim that this type of rhetoric is not influential? Hassan makes millions of dollars because of that influence. His words drive people to do things. Second Thought drives people to do things. You can't downplay your influence and then also take responsibility for changing people's lives.
When you reach a certain size, you do have the opportunity to make changes in people's lives. And it's something that I often take for granted or forget about, but it's awesome to see it in real life in public. That's what makes it worth it.
This guy who proposes to be this Palestinian advocate, he is encouraging the murder of civilians, babies, etc., in an effort to free the occupation.
I don't think he's encouraging it. I think he's justifying it.
No.
When Ethan is able to unconditionally condemn Hamas, Western politicians, and the brutal Israeli regime, while also having empathy for Israeli and Palestinian civilians, and Hassan can't bring himself to condemn people he knows or has relationships to, who are undeniably justifying terrorism against Israelis. He doesn't believe in human rights as a principle. Hassan's empathy is conditional. Hassan's belief in human rights is conditional. Denouncing terrorism shouldn't come with a condition. That is what makes it so blatantly obvious when most sane people can unflinchingly say Hamas is bad and the Israeli government is bad, while still advocating for Palestinian human rights and for Israeli civilians to not be killed by terrorism. People are picking sides like this is some type of game. It's not. As I post this video, thousands of Palestinians are dying at the hands of the Israeli government. There is no winning perspective. People are dying because of where they happen to be born. It feels so fucking hopeless. Like there is absolutely nothing any of us can do. And we're all watching it happen. The most I feel I can do is to try and give some clarity in my own way and foster a better conversation than people like Hassan or Second Thought. They have influence, and they're currently fostering a community that doesn't care about human rights as a principle for all mankind. Human rights to them is only for people they agree with.